A Man and His Dog. There have been so many stories about canines and their relationships with us that it would seem impossible to add anything more to the collection. But I found a story here at the Fireside Tales library which I couldn't resist telling you all, and I hope that you will enjoy it. It is really about the man, Gwyn Mason. Gwyn was a product of the 70s. He was actually kind of a hippie. He loved things like peace and the Beatles and all that. But there was also another side to him, another side of the quarter, you could say. And that was the side of him that desired to reach the pinnacle of masculinity. He spent all of his time, in fact, exercising. He would get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and he would take a very long run, sometimes 10 to 11 miles. And then he would take a swim across the lake, and then he would lift weights, and that was all that he did. He didn't ever have to worry about money because a long time ago he had managed to have a song that got very popular, and had been swimming in the wealth ever since, so that all his time could be devoted to this one thing. Now, there were some that were beginning to worry about him, especially his neighbors and his friends and his family. His sister Julia thought that he might be slowly going insane. After all, he was spending all of his time alone, and he was becoming almost deformed at this point. He had humongous muscles and just the leanest, tightest body. So she decided to get him a dog. A dog that she found at the pound, and it was just this cute little mutt. And actually that week was his birthday party, so his whole family was in attendance. And she walked up to him and she handed him the dog and said, "This is for you." And he looked at it for a moment and he began to get very angry with her. He said that he didn't have time for a dog, and that also she had got it without his permission, and this was a very big thing that she was trying to give him. Well, anyways, she finally just put it down and let it run around the whole party. And anyways, as it was running around, Gwyn was watching it. And finally he stood up and walked over to it. Picking it up, he took it over to the dog, and he looked at it for a moment, and then he threw it into the lake. Well, everybody rushed over, and they began to worry because the dog was whimpering and crying. But Gwyn said, "Hold on, just wait a moment, just wait." And sure enough, the dog began to start to swim, and it finally swam back to the shore. And Gwyn, he chuckled to himself, and he said, "A dog's gotta be tough in this world, just as much as a man needs to be tough. And he's gonna have to find his own way, and not need the help of anyone else." And he walked over to the little puppy, and he said, "I think I am going to name you Ulysses, because such a brave name could almost certainly have the result of a very brave dog." And so that was indeed the name he gave him, and this prophecy ended up becoming at least somewhat true. The dog was just as much obsessed with exercise as its master. Every day Gwyn would take it out on a run, and they'd swim across the lake. And the dog was a little bit nervous about swimming across the lake the first couple of times, but finally it began to get the hang of it. And I should say, in Gwyn's defense, he was never a cruel master. You know, he never beat the dog, and he never said a cruel word to it. And there is even some evidence that there might have been something like love in his heart for the dog. For instance, Gwyn would often let the dog sleep with him, and he often gave him a good meal, the same meal that he would eat. I suppose I could say that at least he had some sort of fondness for the dog. Well, anyways, the two of them, yes, they just spent all of their time together exercising. And some people were wondering whether this union was actually going to be good for Gwyn at all. Gwyn had some trouble with the dog. It would run off, and it would sometimes go over to people's houses, and it became quite a friend of the neighborhood, and Gwyn would have to chase after it, and he would scold the dog for separating him from his exercise. But anyways, Gwyn began entering competitions to become more masculine, and some of these he ended up losing. And sometimes he would just sit there and he would look at the dog and he'd say, "There's no such thing as just winners and losers in life. There's only really winners, and the losers are pushed behind from the ages. Believe me, I know, little fellow." And the dog would look at him. We have to work harder now. We have to work even harder if we're going to achieve this goal. And I know it might be hard sometimes, but this is our purpose." Well, anyways, the dog just licked his master. And so the two exercised even harder and worked even harder, and Julia was now at this point becoming very worried, for not only the man Gwyn, but also the dog was beginning to look in the worst shape. And finally she took him to a diner and she just talked to him, and she said that she thought he needed a psychiatrist, and that she was just very worried about him, that he was just far too obsessed with this. And he ended up becoming very mad, and he said to her, "I cannot, I do what I do, and it's my business. It's none of yours. I have spent my whole life exercising. I've been my whole life trying to become stronger. And this world is meant for the tough. This world is meant for the brave. There's no place for people that simply throw themselves away, that give up on life." Well, anyway, she said, "You're getting rather older, and I think it's time for you to admit that both you and the dog need a rest." But anyways, Gwyn refused, and in fact he stopped speaking to her. He didn't even visit her at Christmas time for 3 years. Anyways, the dog was about 10, and he was about 40, when the event happened. Gwyn was swimming across the lake, and the dog was following close behind, doggy paddling. Anyways, as Gwyn turned around, he noticed something. The dog had an almost fearful look in its eyes, and Gwyn couldn't understand why, because they'd swam across the lake so many times. But just then, the dog was jerked underneath the lake by some kind of force, and Gwyn became frantic. He swam over, and he began diving down deep, and he couldn't find the dog, and he was incredibly worried. But finally he dived down, and he felt the dog, and he pulled him up, and he took him over to the shore. Well, anyways, Gwyn began to perform CPR and became very worried, and he looked up in the heavens and he began to cry. And finally he grabbed hold of him, and because he was very strong and very fast, he was able to get home quite quickly. Anyways, he called the veterinarian, and soon enough the vet arrived, the ambulance, and, well, he drove him to the vet, actually. I apologize. That is a mistake on my part. Anyways, the vet began looking him over, and the vet said he wasn't sure if the dog was going to live. And Gwyn sat there on the chair, and it was one of the worst moments in his life. But he put his hands together and he began to pray. He began to pray to his God, and his God happened to be Buddha. And he asked Buddha to please help him in this, that if he and the dog could get out of this, he would retire, that he would never exercise again, that he would just enjoy a pleasant life. Well, anyways, he went home. And he went to the vet the next day, not expecting much. But when he got there, the vet said he had made a miraculous little cubby, Ulysses, and that he could go see him. So when Gren ran into the room, and there the dog was, and it was looking at its master, and he ran up to it, his dog, and he began to kiss it and began to pet it, and he was the happiest man in the world. Well, anyways, he ended up, Gwyn, meeting again his sister, and they began talking again. And he was true to his word. He enjoyed retirement from that moment on. And Julie asked him if he ever regretted giving up this pursuit of this ultimate masculinity. And he said that no, that he had spent his whole life doing this, and that now he felt he deserved, he and the dog, a well-earned retirement. And she also asked him what he thought about the dog being tugged underneath the water, and how odd that was, for the dog was such a good swimmer. And Gwyn said, "I don't know what it was underneath that murky water. I don't think it was anything from this world, but whatever it was, it changed my life. It was a hand in my destiny, and I thank it." Well, anyways, that's the story. And I know a lot of you probably won't believe it, that a man so deeply rooted in his obsession could be changed by such a simple thing as love. But that's the way the story goes. And as always, sweet dreams and good night.